Amboseli Reserve, midday. The salt flats shimmered white under the heat, their edges blurring against the acacia line. The air pressed down in waves, dry and unmoving. Near the southern boundary, where the grazing basin thinned to dust and stone, an elephant stood alone. Her front right leg trembled slightly. Her ears, limp and motionless, offered no help against the heat. She was young, not calf nor full-grown, and her flank darkened in patches where the skin had overheated but not sweat. Her trunk hung low, unmoving. There were no other elephants in sight. Eli was half a kilometer north, cataloging zebra movement near the marsh perimeter. He wasn't meant to track elephants that day, but through his binoculars the posture caught his eye, not just the stillness but the way her weight leaned forward, as if trying to shift but failing. She should have moved on hours ago. She hadn't. He noted her position, logged the time, then lowered his lens. For a long second he watched with his own eyes. Her ears still did not lift. He stepped into his vehicle but didn't radio it in yet. It wasn't protocol, but it was familiar enough to warrant a closer look. Heat stress was not uncommon this late in the dry season. Still, something about the stance, the way the front legs locked while the hind legs splayed slightly, looked wrong. If she went down here, so close to exposed salt and with no shade, she would not last the afternoon. As he approached, she shifted. Not a step, just a slight buckle in one knee. Dust rose around her feet. Her eyes didn't close but narrowed. There was no shade to offer, no water source within reach. Eli parked at a distance and approached slowly, pausing with each step. He carried nothing more than a half-full canteen and a compact field pouch. Her body did not flinch when he neared, which told him enough. The soil beneath her was too hot to touch. Even her breath, short, staggered, gave off a dry, panting rasp. He crouched beside a clump of dry grass, not closing the distance further yet. He needed to assess. Her sides rose in uneven intervals, each exhale shorter than the last. From here he could see her ribs clearly, not from hunger but from the tension of overheating. A thin white residue lined the folds of her trunk, salt from evaporated sweat that had stopped flowing. The moment she lowered her head, even an inch, Eli stepped forward. One soft line escaped his lips. "It's okay, girl." It was not instruction. It was presence. A gentle offering. He pulled the cotton flap from his pouch and emptied the rest of his water onto it, then reached slowly toward her ear. She flinched at the contact, trunk twitching in protest, but did not step back. He pressed the cool cloth to the back of her ear gently, then again along the rim. It wasn't enough, not nearly, but it might slow the spiral. Just a little. He stepped back, noting the signs. Weak pulse at the temple, skin burning near the jawline, sweat glands dry. If she went down fully, she could asphyxiate under her own weight. If she moved too quickly now, her organs might shut down. If she stayed standing without support, she'd overheat within the hour. He tapped his receiver. Code blue, salt perimeter, solo juvenile in heat distress, still standing, approaching collapse. His voice was flat. No emotion. Just urgency. The wind shifted slightly and brought no relief, only the sound of distant hooves behind the tree line. Unrelated. Unhelpful. The elephant's trunk dragged slightly across the dust, not from action, but gravity. Her breath caught again. No cough, no call. Only silence folding in on itself. Eli removed his own shirt, soaked the inside with what little remained in his canteen, and moved again toward her. This time, she didn't resist the contact. Her shoulder twitched, but her legs held. He draped the wet fabric across the back of her neck, anchoring it just behind the ears. It looked like nothing. But it was all he had. If she collapsed now, she would not rise again. If she ran, she would die faster. If she stood still, she might live. For a while, the air around them did not move. The dust held. She remained upright. But the shift in her balance was barely holding. Eli stayed close, breathing with her, counting the seconds between each tremble. And then, in the quiet heat, her trunk lifted once, barely, and reached toward him. It did not touch, but it stayed suspended in the space between. A signal, a beginning, a plea. She dropped without warning. One moment her trunk hung low in the heat, the next her front legs folded in and her weight shifted back like a tree slowly giving into wind. Her hindquarters sank first. Then the rest followed, slow and heavy, until the silence of the flats was broken by the dull thud of her body against dry earth. A cloud of dust rose, then settled around her shoulders. Her legs twitched once, then stilled. Her breathing, already shallow, became erratic. Small draws, weak and uneven. Eli moved quickly but without alarm. Panic would serve no one here. He adjusted the fabric still draped across her shoulder and reached for the flask at his side, the last of his own water. He didn't hesitate. He poured it directly onto the cloth and pressed it firmly against the inner crease of her massive ear. Her skin was dangerously hot. A few more degrees, and her body would begin to shut down entirely. He didn't speak, only moved with intention. Every step, every gesture exact. With one hand still cooling the ear, he tapped his radio twice before speaking. Juvenile down, confirmed collapse, breathing unsteady, requesting shade gear, hydration wraps, and secondary support. His voice remained flat, but his eyes tracked every movement. Her chest rose, then paused. Then again. Her ribs lifted barely enough to count. She didn't flail. She didn't cry out. The silence itself was an alarm. An elephant in distress usually moved, rolled, tried to rise, signaled others. This one was beyond those instincts now. Her body had chosen stillness. If she remained this way much longer, the blood would begin pooling in her lower side, crushing her own organs. If she struggled too soon, the shock could take her heart. If help didn't arrive within the hour, she would not rise again. The sun above had begun to shift, but no clouds came. Eli scanned the distance for any sign of approaching vehicles, then returned his attention to her mouth. No drool, no trunk movement. He stepped to her front and kneeled beside her head, pouring the last droplets from his flask onto his palm, then offering it. Her eye tracked the motion faintly. Her trunk twitched, lifted a few centimeters and then dropped again. He whispered low, "Stay with me." Nothing more. She exhaled sharply once, not a sound but a burst of warm air from the base of her lungs. Eli took it as a sign, not strength, but life. A pulse still moving, even if thin. The heat on the flats distorted the horizon, but he could now see a shimmer of movement. 2 vehicles, maybe 3, kicking dust from the northeast trail. Still 10 minutes out, maybe more. He stood, stretched his arms once, then removed the sweat-drenched shirt and placed it again across her shoulder. With practiced movements, he layered a second damp cloth over her flank using reserve rags from the kit. It was not enough, but it was something. She remained still, only the twitch of her eyelids and the minute lift of her belly marking the fight within. Her foot shifted slightly in the dirt, a small scrape, an unconscious motion. Her tail flicked once, slowly, the way elephants do when flies gather. There were no flies here, just heat and dust and the edge of time. If she turned onto her side, her lungs could collapse. If she panicked when help arrived, the exertion could stop her heart. If the heat continued rising, the ground itself could become fatal. Eli crouched low again and placed his hand softly near her eye. Not touching, just resting nearby, so she'd know. He would not move until backup came. He had done all he could. The rest would be a matter of timing, of stillness, of whether her body chose to hold on just a little longer. Far behind them, the acacia branches began to stir with the wind. It didn't cool the land, but it shifted the dust slightly. Enough to carry the scent of another living thing, Her ears lifted once, weak, trembling, and then returned to stillness. But they had moved, and for now, that was enough. The first vehicle reached the edge of the flats with a slow roll, dust trailing behind in a wavering line. No sirens, no loud commands, just quiet coordination. 2 rangers stepped out, Lena and Just, both carrying water packs and folded tarps. Eli didn't stand to greet them. He stayed low beside the elephant's head, one hand resting near her ear, the soaked fabric now warm to the touch. Her chest still lifted, but barely. The intervals had grown longer. Her skin burned even in shadow. There was no time for delay. Lena moved first, opening the tarp and unfolding it across the staked frame they'd brought from the truck. The frame went up with soft clicks, then settled into place just above her torso. Shade followed. Just began soaking strips of burlap in a bin of cold water, the fibers stiff at first, but quickly pliant. Eli helped without speaking. They worked as one, laying the wet burlap along her back, then down her side, leaving space around her lungs to monitor movement. No sudden shifts, no heavy pressure. Her ear twitched faintly as the moisture reached her skin. That was a good sign, not recovery, but response. Lena checked the hydration baseline along her trunk and behind the eye ridge. Both were dry, cracked slightly. Still no movement from the trunk itself. Still no sound from her chest. The pulse behind her jawline flickered, inconsistent and soft. That meant her circulation was failing. If the cooling worked fast enough, there might still be time to reverse it. If not, the internal damage could already be too severe. Just reached beneath her front leg and placed a damp wrap under the shoulder joint. The temperature there was rising faster than elsewhere, a known stress point for heat-stricken elephants. As the cloth pressed against her skin, her leg shifted slightly in the dust. Her toes curled, then relaxed. Not withdrawal, reflex. If she starts to pant again, we'll try saline mist, Lena said quietly. Eli gave a small nod. The moment was not for decisions, only actions. Each cloth was checked every few minutes, re-soaked, rotated. The tarp above caught the high sun, casting narrow lines of shade across her shoulder and rib cage. A second bin was prepared to drape over the rear. Her tail moved again, this time brushing the dirt slowly from left to right, not rhythmically, just once. Eli leaned in close and whispered, "Almost there." The ground beneath her was now saturated, water pooling slightly in the shallow dips where her side pressed into the soil. Heat still rose from her belly and chest, visible in the haze above her flank. The team worked without pause. No voice raised, no movement rushed. Every adjustment came with stillness first, a breath to see if she would resist. She didn't. But she didn't help either. If her organs had already begun shutting down, no amount of cooling would revive her. If her brain had overheated, even recovery would bring complications. If her body failed to regulate in the next 20 minutes, she would lose all strength to lift herself again. Just monitored the rise of her chest, counting the time between each breath. He shook his head once, then adjusted the wrap on her thigh. Lena applied more water to the upper tarp edge, letting it drip slowly onto her shoulder like light rain. A soft sound came from her throat, not loud, more like a breath pushed through resistance. Her mouth opened for a second, not to call, but as if grasping for air. Her eyes stayed half-lidded. Then, for the first time since the fall, her trunk stirred. Just a fraction. It lifted, then settled into a different curve. Closer to her body now. Not curled, just moved. Eli glanced at Lena. She had seen it, too. Neither spoke. The light began to shift, casting the tarp's shadow longer now, reaching her front legs. The flies had returned, buzzing low near her foot, but not yet landing. The breeze carried a faint moisture now, not from sky, but from earth. The soil had begun to hold water again. No one moved away from her side. The work continued. Cloths rotated, shade adjusted, hands placed carefully along her skin. Still too soon to know. Still too much at risk. But her foot scraped once more through the dust, leaving a soft line behind it. Not enough to rise, not yet, but enough to mark that she was still present, still fighting. The tarp above her rippled faintly as the first wind in hours passed through the flats. It wasn't cold, but it shifted the heat just enough to let the moisture linger. The ground beneath her had gone from chalk dry to a thin layer of cooled earth, darkened where the water had pooled. Her skin, once hot to the touch, now held warmth instead of fire. The burlap along her ribs was damp but no longer steaming. Each breath she took still came slowly, but the rhythm had changed. Less strained, less shallow. Lena crouched near her hind legs and held a palm just above her flank, feeling for consistency. Yost adjusted the edge of the tarp once more, lowering it to shield her chest. Across from them, Eli knelt with the empty flask in one hand, watching the minute rise and fall of her body. It had taken nearly an hour to get here. There were no guarantees. But something had shifted. Her eye, which had remained half closed since she collapsed, now opened further. The lashes flicked once, then again. It wasn't full awareness, but it was motion. She tracked slightly. Not a full turn, just a shift toward the movement as Yost stepped back from her side. When he paused, the eye stilled. It followed. Not randomly, deliberately. Eli whispered again, "You're almost there." There was no reaction to the voice, but after a moment, the muscles along her lower trunk twitched. Once, then again. Small, rhythmic contractions like the slow return of control. No lift, no reach, but motion where there had been none. The basin they'd filled sat just beside her, low and wide enough for her to access without strain, if she could move. The waterline barely rippled under the tarp's shadow. Eli leaned forward, not with urgency, but quiet readiness. He didn't expect her to drink, but if she even reached toward it, that would be enough. A soft huff escaped her mouth, followed by a longer breath. Then her front toes flexed slightly, scraping faint lines in the cooling earth. It was the first true sign of strength returning to her extremities. Still not enough to lift, but the ability to feel was there again, to press, to test her own weight. Yost checked her flank again and nodded slightly. The readings were improving, marginally, but not falling. Lena misted another cloth and placed it gently against her jawline. The skin there no longer recoiled. Then, as if responding to a signal only she could sense, her trunk shifted again. This time, not just a twitch, but a full curl. It didn't rise high, but the tip lifted, turned slightly toward the basin, and hovered just inches above the dirt. She held it there, long enough for all three rangers to freeze. Then, with a final movement, she lowered it into the edge of the water. A ripple spread outward. Her trunk did not submerge fully. It rested in the basin like a leaf fallen into stillness. Then it lifted, barely wet, and returned to her chest. She had found the water. It wasn't drinking, not yet, but she had sought it, found it. Touched it. That meant orientation was returning. That meant instinct had not left her. If she could recognize water, she might soon drink. If she drank, her body could rehydrate from within. If that happened soon, organ failure could be reversed. Eli remained by her side, not touching, just close. She didn't move again for several minutes, but her eye tracked a bird that passed over them, slowly, with purpose. And when the wind returned, brushing the tarp gently once more, her ear lifted by a few degrees. The dust had begun to settle across the flats again. Light faded from the west, softening the harshness of the salt. Her trunk stayed curled near her body now, not slack, and when the wind moved through the brush line in the distance, she turned her eye toward it, and kept it there. There was a stillness in the air that did not belong to the heat. The sun had begun its long descent, casting golden lines across the edge of the flats. Eli sat quietly near the tarp's corner, watching the young elephant's breathing hold steady, though shallow. Her trunk rested loosely by her chest. Her eyes moved, slow but alert. The team had paused their interventions, letting her body settle into its own rhythm. No one spoke. The basin remained full beside her, untouched again since the last reach. She was holding, but nothing more. They had done what they could. Now the waiting began. Then a vibration passed underfoot. It was so faint the others missed it, but Eli felt it first, a rhythmic tremor, low and even, coming from the west. Not mechanical, not wind, something else. He stood slowly and turned toward the tree line. The grasses there had begun to move, parting not outward but inward, as though something large was brushing them aside. Another tremor followed, then another. Hoofbeats. Too steady for buffalo, too few for zebra. He raised a hand, signaling quiet, though no one had spoken. From the acacia line, a shape emerged. Dust clung to her flanks in pale streaks, but she moved with precision. Large, older, deliberate. Her head held low, not in fear, but in focus. Her ears stayed close to her sides, not from heat, but from recognition. The radio collar around her neck bore an old tag, one Eli had seen in records but never in the field. The matriarch of a herd last logged over a year ago. Not spotted since. She did not pause. She walked slowly across the flats, not toward the humans. Not toward the vehicles, but directly to the collapsed young one lying beneath the tarp. The team stepped back. From behind her, 3 more elephants followed. 2 adults, 1 subadult, spaced at distance but moving as one. There were no calls, no cries, just silence and the deep thudding of footfalls over brittle soil. They approached without hesitation and stopped a few meters from her side. The matriarch came closest. The young elephant did not rise, but her trunk moved, barely, a small curl at the tip, a breath. Her body shifted once in the dirt. The matriarch stood still, watching. Her ears lifted slightly. Then she moved forward, stepping carefully to her left until her front foot rested inches from the younger one's flank. Her trunk extended downward, not in warning or alarm, but slow, gentle contact. She traced the shoulder, the curve of the back, the still damp skin. Then she exhaled, long and low. The others stayed behind her, forming a quiet semicircle. They did not crowd. They did not test the rangers. They only waited. The older one stepped once more around the side, brushing her trunk now across the ear and cheek of the collapsed body. It was not a push. It was not to wake. It was memory. Her body language was clear. She knew this one. This was not a stranger. Yost whispered, "She's part of them." It explained the collapse. It explained the absence of others nearby. The young elephant had fallen behind, perhaps separated days ago, perhaps lost by accident or exhaustion or misjudgment. But she had not been abandoned. They had come back. Eli did not move. The matriarch stood now beside him, not close enough to touch, but near enough that he could see the faded line where the collar had worn her skin. Her eye turned toward him just briefly, then returned to the elephant on the ground. If they intervened now, it might cause panic. If they stepped forward, the family might retreat, but if they waited, something larger might take place. The young elephant stirred again. A longer breath. Her foot scraped once more. Her trunk reached slightly, not high, not with strength, but toward the matriarch's front leg. Contact. The tip brushed skin. The older one didn't move. She let it happen. Then, with a deep shift of weight, the matriarch knelt slightly on one leg, just enough to drop her head beside the younger one's ear. Her trunk remained draped across her neck like a line drawn in dust. A circle closed. The wind carried a low sound over the flats, not from her, but from one of the others. A breath released through the trunk, long and even, almost like a sigh. The sun fell lower, casting their shadows long across the salt line. The basin glinted once, then dulled. No movement broke the circle. Not yet. Not until she was ready. The matriarch's breath moved in slow rhythms now, soft but steady, each exhale rising from her chest like warm mist against the cooling air. She had circled the young one fully, pressing her trunk to the body in deliberate lines. Shoulder, ribs, spine, cheek. The younger elephant lay still, but there was no longer the deep stillness of collapse. Her muscles twitched gently. Her eye blinked without strain. The effort to breathe had become her own again. The other elephants stood just beyond the tarp's edge, quiet as dusk. They did not close in. They waited, positioned as if holding space, watching the matriarch move through her steps with the certainty of something old and rehearsed. There was no vocalization, no gesture out of place. The flat around them had gone silent again, except for the occasional creak of the shade frame and the distant whisper of wind brushing through grass. Then the matriarch shifted course. She took 2 steps back from the young one's side, turned slightly, and faced the ranger. Her head lowered, not aggressively, not defensively. Her trunk dropped, then lifted partway before pausing at midair, suspended between gesture and rest. Eli did not move. She looked directly at him. Not past him, not near him, at him. He had known elephants to turn their gaze before, to track movement, to watch human shapes from the safety of distance. But this was not watching. It was recognition, not of him specifically, but of the presence that had been beside the fallen one through heat and collapse, through cloth and water and stillness. This was the moment when something shifted from tolerance to something closer to regard. Her ears stayed flat, no threat held in them. Her legs stood even, weight distributed with confidence. The position she held now could only come from a matriarch, grounded, aware, and sure of her authority. Yet in that moment, she stepped closer. The distance between them closed to less than 2 meters. Eli stayed still, his arms at his side, not raised, not extended. His breath shallow and controlled. He could feel the faint humidity from her nostrils as she exhaled again. There was no tension in her face, only a pause that held time. Then, slowly, she moved her trunk forward, not toward his chest or face, but beside his shoulder. Not touching him, not testing, just near enough to feel the warmth of his body. He said nothing. She did not wait for a sound. After a few long seconds, she lowered her trunk and turned her head slightly toward the young one once more. Her posture relaxed, not in surrender, but in closure. The communication had passed. Whether she understood him was not the point. Something had been acknowledged. Behind them, the younger elephant stirred again. Her trunk curled toward her side, brushing softly against the dirt. It was the first motion she'd made without a human's help since the collapse. The matriarch returned to her, circling once more in a half-step arc. Then she remained still, standing in a long shadow that stretched eastward. Eli backed away slowly, giving space not out of fear but respect. The other elephants did not react. Their posture remained unchanged, their eyes soft and alert. If the young one rose too soon, her legs could fail again. If the herd moved before she was able, they might be forced to leave her behind. But if they stayed through nightfall, the cooling air might give her strength. The risk remained, but it no longer felt alone. The light across the flats had gone pale. The sun hung low now, brushing its edge against the horizon. A faint rustle passed through the grass line. In that quiet hour, surrounded by heat-worn land and distant silence, one elephant lay breathing. One ranger stood still, and one matriarch held her place, eyes soft with something deeper than distance. The first light came low and gray, stretching quietly over the flats before the heat could return. The soil held the memory of yesterday's sun, but its surface had cooled enough to allow breath without struggle. Dew clung to the burlap cloths draped across the young elephant's shoulders, now softened from hours of contact and mist. Her body remained still, but her posture had changed. The collapse was no longer limp. Her legs were tucked more neatly beneath her. Her head rested upright, not pressed flat to the ground. The difference was small, but unmistakable. Eli watched from a few meters away, sitting cross-legged on the dry ridge. He hadn't slept. None of them had. The herd had not left. Through the night they stood nearby, shifting quietly in place, their feet moving slowly as if pacing time itself. The matriarch had not stepped away from the young one's side. Once, in the hours just before dawn, she placed her trunk gently along the younger elephant's neck and held it there for nearly a minute. Now, as the light changed again, turning gold at the edges, the young one stirred. First, the trunk, a small curl forward, then a slight twitch toward the ground. Then the right front leg unfolded slightly, pushing against the earth. The tarp had already been removed, the shade frame packed down so she could rise freely if the moment came. Yost had repositioned the basin nearby, filled again with cool water just in case. No one rushed her. Her body rocked forward, not a full motion, just the first attempt at lifting. Her leg trembled, then dropped, but she did not lay flat again. Instead, her breathing quickened, not with distress, but exertion. Eli stood slowly, just enough to see her entire form. If she pushed too soon, her legs might fail again. If she stayed down much longer, her joints would stiffen beyond recovery. But if she rose cleanly, once, without collapse, she might walk. She shifted again, now with more weight pressed into her shoulder. Dust lifted around her like a quiet cloud. Her left leg tucked beneath her, bracing. Then, with one strained movement, she rocked forward and rose. Not all at once, not quickly, but fully. Her back legs followed, unsteady but upright. Her ribs heaved with effort. Her trunk dangled, then lifted weakly toward the ground, touching nothing. She stood still. For several long seconds no one moved. Then her head tilted, not sharply, but in search of something familiar. The matriarch stepped forward. No greeting, no call, just presence. She approached her from the left side and brushed her trunk once along her back. The young one didn't lean away. She didn't move toward her either, but she remained standing. And that was enough. One by one, the rest of the herd shifted. Their posture relaxed, and they began to turn toward the brush line where the trail opened into the acacia stretch. There was no signal, no command, just motion. The older females took the lead. The young one stayed where she was for a moment longer, legs trembling but holding. Then her front right foot moved, barely a step, just enough to follow the shifting line. Her back legs came next, slower but with purpose. Eli stepped back without a word. She passed him quietly, the matriarch just behind. Her body still bore the marks of strain, dirt caked into her flank, ribs visible beneath the skin. Ears slack from fatigue. But she walked. Her stride was broken, uneven, but it carried her forward. They entered the brush line as one. No sound, no calls, just the crunch of dry twigs beneath their weight and the low hush of grass parting around them. The wind carried their scent for a few seconds more, then scattered it across the open land. The flat stood empty again, except for the faint prints left behind. One deep, pressed from collapse, and a second set, lighter, leading away. The grass swayed in silence, and the basin stayed full. The light touched the edge of Eli's shoulder, then moved on.